Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Lowdown. Today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Davide Igono, aka at UNDERVALU on Twitter, better known to his followers as, sharing wisdom on sporting directors and recruitment, having profiled over 75 sporting directors to date. David, welcome to the show.
Greetings. Glad to be on here. It's been a long time coming.
A while, 6 months in the making, 5, 6 months in the making.
That sounds right. That sounds
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
yeah, pit stop in DC.
Yeah, it blows my mind. It was only in July, but then it's like, man, July feels like 4 months ago in itself. But yeah, that was cool to meet you and Mahir there.
A wild goose chase around the Lincoln Memorial, much much akin to Chelsea and Manchester United's fruitless pursuit of Frankie de Jongs this summer. But as
Careful,
we
careful.
as we begin with every podcast, David, you know, we begin by asking the guests their earliest football memory, and for you, I'm interested to hear what was your earliest football memory.
Oh man. Whoa. So I have two, but that's not a legitimate answer because the first one is always the first one. I'm trying to think. I know it was the World Cup. Um, it might be Baggio missing the penalty. Just going back that far. I mean, I wasn't. I mean, I was born in the United States. It was American football and basketball. Those are the only two. In fact, it was really only basketball. That's the only Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen. That's all I watched. But if I remember correct, I think that one was the World Cup in LA. Is that right?
Yeah, the Rose
Um,
Bowl, I believe.
yeah, the Rose Bowl. I remember him missing that and his mullet with the the glorious haircut and him crying or I just yeah, that's probably my first full-blooded memory.
Not the happiest of memories.
No, no, but it's funny. The older I get and the more I dig back and peel back the layers on sport, the more I appreciate that. You know what? If you're really serious about sport, you need to chase the pain. You need to chase the suffering because that is where the true champions are uncovered. Um, yes, you should have moments of glory and moments that this is why I suffered for so long. You'll get those moments, but the painful moments, especially if you're lucky, you can see it in others, can be instructive for you as you go on your path.
Speaking of Pats, I mean, David, you've been on your own. You've been on your own one. You're better known to those in the industry as at Undervalue on Twitter, where you post some absolutely fantastic stuff regarding recruitment, regarding sport and directors. And if you don't mind me, I have a quote here I want to pull up from your
Sure.
11 Questions project. The pursuit of wisdom in any walk of life quickly reveals what you think you know. It's not nearly enough to get to where you want to go. I mean, where did this curiosity stem from to pursue a deeper knowledge about recruitment and consequently sport directors in football?
Yeah, it's a great question. I had to be careful to keep the full answer compact, concise. So I grew up in America, United States, and I played American football. Always, I mean, so I have three kids. The oldest is 7, so I have younger kids, and I just tell my wife all the time, I'm like, "Good luck." She's like, "What do you mean, good luck?" I'm like, I'm not telling these kids that they have to learn academics and study because the only reason why I did it as a child was so that I could play sports. The only reason why you're talking to me in my office right now is because I was able to link. Okay, if I learn what they're teaching me, I get to play football. Those like that's how my mind works. Still works that way, sadly. To this day. But for me, athletically, when I was an athlete, I was a late bloomer. I had the drive, the passion. I think I was tactically smart enough, but athletically, physically, I was late. Late, December birthday. So, and like just late. And I knew that I was as good, if not better, than a lot of my peers in American football, but I wasn't getting the outward approval. So in spite of all that, I mean, when I look back and I shake my head, I was truly fortunate and blessed. I made a career out of it, still made a career out of it, despite those shortcomings. And I was offered multiple times in my playing career, David, you need a coach. You need a coach. You need a coach. You need a coach. You'd be a great coach. And I told myself, never. I would never coach professionally. I will only entertain coaching my kids or my kids' friends or mates because I know I had it. Not that I know, I've witnessed the sacrifice that coaches make, and I knew that I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't man enough for that, if that makes sense. Because the coaches and the managers, as a side note, coaches, managers on I'm gonna say professional, but it doesn't necessarily need to be strictly professional. That is the hardest, most visible, accessible leadership position in our world. We don't have access to presidents and prime minister. Most of us don't, right? We don't have access to generals of armies or Steve Jobs past, but we don't have access to Bezos or Elon Musk. Most of us don't, right? But who do we have access to that is in a high profile leadership position? High profile leadership position. Coaches, NBA basketball, Premier League, Serie A, those are the leaders that are the most accessible and by default, the most criticized. So I knew for me, after playing, giving everything, I mean, overcoming knee surgeries and this or that, I just knew that I didn't want to be a coach, but I've always been fascinated by why did I make it? Like, I mean, I'll be honest, I don't think I was even that good. I just wanted it more than the others. So if you look at, say, a Tom Brady in American football, or even actually, ironically, you look at Roberto Baggio. He was good, right? I mean, generational talent. However, I think he ruptured his ACL or at least 2 or 3 times. And you read some of those stories about the rehab in the 90s, 80s, 90s, what these guys had to go through. I mean, I'm sitting here. I had my knee surgery when I was playing 2005, and it was infinitely easier. I say easier with quotation marks with respect, but I had way more resources and ability to come back faster. So to answer your question, I have always been fascinated by recruitment. I mean, since I played, because I wanted to know why the players, and I don't want to drop too many American football stars of the '90s, but why is Jerry Rice good? Why was he so much better than all the other ones? Because he worked his tail off and he worked on this. He worked on this specifically. Why are the New England Patriots so good yet they don't? I mean, I don't think they've drafted in the top 10, for American sports fans in over a decade. But why are they consistently good? That's what got me on this path. And then to get specifically into football, candidly, I joke, but candidly, sorry. Oh, when you get to be of a certain stature in business, you have too many phones. So you try to get to a place where you don't have any phones. I'm on that path right now. But sorry about that. I jokingly asked myself before I did that 11 questions project, I jokingly was asking myself during COVID and watching ESPN Plus and watching the Danish Superliga, how hard is it to be a sporting director? Like, I mean, other than having contacts, I know that's hard. That's hard fought, hard earned, right? To have the network. But at the end of the day, you just pick the best player, right? Or best players, right? So that 11 questions project was my Trojan horse. I wanted to see if I could access the footballing industry and get knowledge from those who either, well, I believe the majority of those 115 plus people were outsiders. They weren't, say, they didn't play academy football for Chelsea or whatever. They were analysts or bloggers or people on football Twitter who broke through. So that project was more so to find out, like, okay, what do I not see? What am I not getting? What am I not seeing? And then after doing that project, which, I mean, the book is, if you dig, you can download it. But the blog is still up. The blog is still up. What I realize is like, you know what? Like this might seem crazy, but like I'm gonna even push harder on this because recruitment is the most secure way, and there's different silos or departments of recruitment, but recruitment is the most bulletproof way to improve any club. Yes, you can wait for a very well funded takeover from your list of American investment firms or state backed investment funds or what have you. But if you just want to improve your club, the best way to do it is recruitment. How do you develop players from your academy? Do you use data to find undervalued players? Do you use some combination of both? And that, I mean, there's 3 or 4 questions in one there, but that singular concept is what, I mean, if I didn't have a day job, I could spend the next 15, 20 years sharing on Twitter exclusively just what I find, you know? So I hope that answers your question, but that's what I was looking for. Is just like, am I initially, what am I missing? And then once that door was opened, I said, okay, like, why is this so hard? And there's multiple reasons. When I say so hard, I mean that with respect to context of each clubs and their situations. But that's what drove me down that path. Like, why are we messing up on recruitment so much across the globe? Whether it's club with the budget of say a Chelsea or a club with a budget of me, where they have zero budget to get players. Does that make sense?
It does, of course, and you'd have one overarching guy who would be overseeing all of this recruitment, the mysterious mythical figure that is the sporting director. In your own words, David, after all this research, how would you define the roles and responsibilities of a sporting director?
Wow, that is an easy question, but then that question that is easy is splintered and it's repurposed and retitled, relabeled depending on the culture of the club, the country of the club, and the expectation. I would say in general terms, the sporting director is, for me, from what I've researched and what I see that works best, the sporting director is the first lieutenant of the ownership. That basically means that he is the one who oversees the culture and I'm going to call it the talent pathway of every dimension, every department of the club. So whether that is the cleaning staff, whether that's the physios, whether that's players, management, vendors, sponsors, the sporting director is the first lieutenant, first mate. He is the one who ownership says, just for example, David, we want to make sure that we have a culture of constant improvement, Kaizen in our club. I need you to implement that across the entire spectrum. Okay, so whether that is making sure that for the academy and you set up that all of your let's call it students or players are in class and they're making sure that they're meeting their boards, their requirements, or is making sure that you only hire managers or anybody who touches your players they have to have a positive attitude, they have to have certain certifications. It it can be much more difficult, or not difficult. It can be much more differentiated than that, or more specific, depending on the magnitude of the club. But to me, that is what I have come to decide as far as what that sporting director role is. Because in essence, I know that I write about and research sporting directors, but good sporting directors aren't good unless they have good ownership. It really, you can't separate the two. As good as Monchi is, he's had an owner and a board who has supported him. And when I say good, obviously that's relative, to that situation. But you can't have a great sporting director and a misaligned board or owner. It won't work. I mean, using Monchi as an example, when he went to AS Roma, that's what happened. You have a club that is good. I mean, Roma, if you look at transfer market and just as far as their youth academy, it is, I don't want to piss off my Italian friends. They're top 3 or 4 at worst. At worst, they churn out talent. They're very strategic and usually very sound at recruitment. But then they had Monchi and then had Pallotta and they had all these different things. And then it's Rome. So you have that churn, that I can't think of the word, but you just have a lot of expectation and missed targets and it didn't work. So to me, again, just to be clear, sporting director is the first lieutenant of the ownership. Now, for a specific club, that might mean different things, but that is his job. His job is to make sure that the club culture flows through everything. And if we're only talking about a sporting director that deals with recruitment, he needs to have an idea of the identity of the club, the identity of that ownership wants of the club might be more important to a degree than the actual identity of the club as well. So that would be my answer.
And Monchi being one of 75 plus quote unquote successful sporting directors, which you've reviewed and analysed and put out on Twitter to the masses, David. I mean, what are some of the most consistent reoccurring themes that you've noticed from your research as sporting directors?
You mean about Monchi or just in general?
In general, about the 75 plus, which you've researched.
It's a good question, and you're not gonna like the answer because it's. I mean, it is so boring that when I share these threads and people love them. I mean, I had people DMing me, "I love the thread." I'm just laughing because they all say the good ones. They all say the same thing. They just say it in a different language. They say it in a different context, but it's the same thing. It is 100% about fit and alignment. 100%. If there is not fit as far as okay, we want to sign. Let's have fun. We want to sign Cristiano Ronaldo. Okay, does he fit our playing style? No, but he's available. That conversation alone, the sporting directors that are good, whether it's Christoph Freund, whether it's Monchi, whether it's Simon Mesvin in Norway, whether it's Jesper Fredberg in Denmark, whether it's Pietro Accardi in Empoli at Italy, in Italy. If you don't know who you are and what you do, you're essentially asking yourself to be relieved of your duties sooner than what you would like. So that is tenet number one: fit and alignment. We have to have a defined playing style. We have to have a defined. I'm going to call it. I don't want to say outcome because that really makes it binary. I don't necessarily want to do that. But what are our objectives? What are we chasing? So who are we? Why are we chasing for European places or to win the league or to just develop players and do our best? When you look at a club like FC Nordsjælland, and they're a little bit different because they actually, I think it's almost a month ago now, they split their sporting director role up into 3, which is another. So, and forgive me if I start talking in tangents here because not only do I really research sporting directors, but I'm also very, very, very interested and very, very obsessed about general managers in American baseball, basketball, and the NFL. All that means, as far as my undervalued Twitter account, all that means is that I'm looking at what works in 3 other sports at a high level. And what you see in American baseball, and you see it some in football, American football, is they're taking that sporting director, general manager role, and they're breaking it up. They're breaking it up even more. And when you look at FC Nordsjælland, I think without a doubt is one of my favorite clubs. Obviously they do what they do with Right to Dream and the academy in Farum there in Denmark, but they have sold out. They are developing players and they are developing them to win, and they are not going. I mean, they might sign a 30 something year old player for a specific gap. Their goalie, Andreas Hansen, they signed this earlier this year because their 18-year-old goalie, Emmanuel Ogura, it probably wasn't best for him to be starting. Not because he wasn't good enough, but because, I mean, can you imagine being 18 years old and starting being the starting goalkeeper at one of the biggest clubs in Scandinavia. Some are cut out for it sooner than others. The point is that it wasn't best for his development. They decided that. You're going to sign players of a certain age, but they're going to play the youngest. I think this is I want to say, a third or fourth year that they have led not just Scandinavia, but Europe in age, player age, average age. And they took their sporting director role because they also have a women's team. They took their sporting director role and they split it into three. They said, hey, I forget the gentleman's name, but hey, you're going to be over the women's sports, or sorry, women's football. And then they took the remaining two guys and they bought Jans Larson back. He had been on the board. They put him back as the quote unquote sporting director. And then they took Michael Hemmersam, who had been acting sporting director, and they put him over the academy and the youth setup. So you see that the clubs that are intent on recruiting their way in a way that is fruitful and efficient and repeatable for them, they double down on what works. They know what their playing style is. I also did a longer thread on Fleming Peterson, the manager for FC Nordsjælland, and how they develop players and what their I'm going to call it their ethos is around it is diabolical, because anybody else could do it, but nobody commits to it. You know, it's not something that is, dare I say, unattainable. So to answer your question, I mean, fit and alignment and identity. If you can, I mean, I could add more to it, but if you have fit with who you, whether it's managerial or player or technical talent, if you have a fit as far as who you surround yourself with as a sporting director, but then you are very, very keen on your identity, it makes it really, really hard to fail if you are giving time and resources, i.e., money, to make decisions. One of Victor Orta at Leeds is one of my favorite sporting directors because he's very candid. Most sporting directors are not candid. If I've looked at 75 plus, I would say majority of them do not want to rock the boat. Victor Orta, he can't not rock the boat. That's just how he's wired. And he is very adamant. That player is a great player. He's not for us because of X, Y, Z. And when you can invert the decision making into why is this player not our type of player, it'll make it to where when you see a player that is your player, you will move heaven and earth to get that player, and you will reap the dividends.
What makes it even more interesting, and you touched on it briefly there, David, is that all these different sporting directors are playing different games. You know, some are going for domestic success, others are going for European qualification, others are looking to stave off the threat of relegation. There's a bracket, I would have to say, of clubs which I would be very interested for you to go speak about a bit more. And they would be those player development clubs or player development polishers. I'm speaking about the likes of your Bilbao's, Dortmund's, Atalanta's.
Yeah. Do you just want to talk about them in general, or do you
Just
have a
in general,
specific?
yes, some of the specific principles that are going on at play.
Yeah, so for me, those are my favorite types of clubs, simply because the success that we see them having on the pitch is because they decided long ago to be different. So when you look at Dortmund, yes, I mean they were, and forgive me for you German Bundesliga historians, I mean they've always been one, or let's just say 1A or two or three at worst. Everybody's always been behind Bayern, but again, that's a different podcast. They knew that economically that they couldn't fight with Bayern. So whether it's Sven Mislintat, who I've profiled before, or I think it's just Michael Zorc. I don't know if it's Mikhail or Michael Zorc. They have said, hey, as long as we make Europe every single year and we make sure that we place third or higher, we are going to have a revenue stream that we can leverage to not just be different, but to take advantage of market efficiency. So I'm going to stop and say and give a warning here. I'm a financial and insurance guy, so if I start to say things that don't always jive with um, football and recruitment, just stop me and say, what does that mean, David? Because I can go in and out of it really quickly, and I don't want to lose anybody. I don't want to lose you. But that market, if all a market inefficiency is use Erling Haaland as an example. It's the ability to see talent that is not being given one key resource, whether it's Jadon Sancho or Jude Bellingham or my mind's going blank now. Lewandowski, Robert Lewandowski. They see talent that is in their eyes obvious, but nobody else is at the table with intent. Not saying there's no other clubs at the table, but whether it's Erling Haaland or even I think about, I mean, as a side note, one of the filthiest players that I haven't been able to see a lot of him recently, but one of the filthiest players in the last 5 or 7 years when he's healthy is Ousmane Dembele. Wow. What I mean, I'll do it once we get off this call, but some of his plays, they call them in American football, they call them splash plays. Some of his sequences, like he's the guy that you would want to fight after the game because he made you look utterly ridiculous. But anyway, back to my point. They got him from Ren for, I'm not saying for peanuts. I'm not saying that, but they got him at a discount, at a marked discount from what they sold him to Barcelona for. You're telling me that there's other clubs that didn't recognize the talent, that they didn't have the money. Maybe it's a better way of saying it. They didn't want to pay for his services. So those diamond polishers, to me, so that's Dortmund, Red Bull Salzburg. Sorry, my employees is leaving for the day. Red Bull Salzburg does it time and time and time again with center forwards. I mean, other positions too, but whether it's Erling Haaland or Adeyemi or my mind is going blank, but they have many, many different ways of inserting a player. I guess the term is blooding a player. They get a player to replace the lead player. It seems like 2 to 3 windows before that player is sold. Even when you look at is it Sesko that they have now? He hasn't. Um, I wish I could check. I don't have Y Scout on one of these laptops. I don't know. I don't even know if he passed 1,500 minutes in the Austrian Bundesliga this past season. Yet multiple clubs, multiple big clubs, were at the table wanting to purchase him. And Freund and Red Bull Salzburg realized that. I mean, yeah, you can realize a very huge capital gain, or as they say in Italy, plus valenza for selling him on. But is that what is best for the player? And ended up selling him to RB Leipzig, which is I don't even know what you even call it with them anymore. The big brother, if you will. But he's not going till next season. So whether it's Dortmund or Red Bull Salzburg, who focus more so on, and then we were saying this before we started recording. In my research over the past year or so, Red Bull Salzburg, FC Nordsjælland, and I'm blanking on the other club. It'll come to me as I keep talking. But those clubs care more about the player. I'm sorry, they care more about the person than the actual player. They know that player will come good. And again, when we talk about player, we're talking about teenagers. We're not talking about men. We're not talking about 35-year-olds or 28-year-olds. We're talking about teenagers. We know that those teenagers will come good, but they have to make sure that they nurture the person. And that is where I think about Athletic Bilbao, and they don't get enough credit. Athletic Bilbao, those Basque clubs. So if you look at the CIES Observatory, you look at their numbers and who plays academy or youth players from their setup. Athletic Bilbao, Real Sociedad, Osasuna. And Osasuna, I always get distracted by other setups or sporting directors, but these are clubs that, for the most part, we don't talk about a lot because they're not challenging Real Madrid or Barcelona or Atletico Madrid for either the cup or the league. Yet they continue to polish diamonds. So um, I'm tending to talk in circles here, but at the end of the day, those player development clubs, they are the ones who give themselves the opportunity to fight with those massive clubs because they are producing talent. And yes, they're making a profit off of those talents when they sell them on, but they're getting talent upstream they're getting talent at the top of the food chain before everybody else knows that. So whether it's when you look at Athletic Bilbao and you look at the Williams brothers, they, I mean, can you imagine the joy from their academy director who saw those two Williams boys, Nico and Iñaki, 15 years ago, saying, "Hey, those are going to be first team players, not for Atletico or Real, but for us, for Bilbao." That takes a level of commitment and more so conviction to what you do that is rare in world football.
And getting back to your earlier point at Dortmund, I think it was very pertinent for a piece which I wanted to do on recruitment and player trading because you spoke about it on one of your threads earlier on this week, I believe, David, being that it's one of the best tools of a sporting director now, this talent arbitrage. Could you explain the concept for those which are listening?
Yeah, it sounds like a big word, but it's really, really, really. I mean, it's a financial word, but it's very simple. How do we get player X to play for us? And when he gets good enough and his talent outgrows us, how do we sell him to a different market, different club, different league for more? I mean, it's a way of when we look at the stock market, a lot of people kick themselves that they didn't buy Facebook or Apple or whatever, hot brand name when it first came out. Well, how do you find those stocks? How do you find those finds, those, dare I say, lottery tickets? You have to be looking, right? You have to be looking. And when you look at when you dig into player arbitrage, to me, I mean, and I actually did a little poll. I think might have been it was within the last 2 weeks. What is the general question was, what is the point of player arbitrage? To make a profit, brand slash identity, or I want to say it was to win. And a lot of people said to make a profit because that's the obvious answer. You obviously aren't arbitraging if you're losing money. you're poorly investing if that's the case, right? So the point of player arbitrage, and I'm trying to think of I know I've done threads on it. We did that. I'm trying to think of did one with Elaine Suter with FC St. Gallen this week. I'll use I'll use Bronx. You know what? I'll keep it simple. We'll do FC Northland because I know that one like the back of my hand. So when you look at let's see, they sold Kamaldeen Sulemana, Simon Adingra. I think that's it as far as bigger ticket. I mean, some of the other ones have moved. Like Waledzi moved this window, but it wasn't.
Kudos,
It
Mohammed
wasn't as.
Kudos.
There we go. I knew I was forgetting. Yeah, he moved to Ajax. Kudus moved to Ajax. When you look at those players, those profiles, I mean, I'm saying this with some naivete. For the most part, if you have an 18 or 19-year-old African player playing heavy minutes, a lot of minutes in the Danish Superliga, first tier, he's probably pretty good, right? I mean, it's, it's safe to say that he's probably going to be solid. I don't know if he's going to be probably not going to be Ballon d'Or level, but there's a very good chance that he's at least going to perform on a Europa League level or maybe even a Champions League level. So arbitrage, very simply in recruitment, is saying whether it's through, it's more patient in the youth setup and developing players, but it's more obvious when you look at clubs that buy players. We are going to take the upfront hit, financial hit of signing this player now. And we are going to put him in our setup. So remember when you asked me what's the role of a sporting director? The really good sporting directors, if they do what I said a sporting director does, not that I'm an expert, but more so if they are the first lieutenant of the ownership and the club as far as what do we want to be about. In the FC Nordsjælland example, so a player that they signed, I think it's 2 seasons, maybe 2.5 seasons ago, was Andreas Schelderup, the Norwegian. I mean, he might be the most baby-faced killer I've seen. I mean, just pudgy cheeks, floppy hair, 17 years old. Well, I think he's 18 now. They signed him, and it kind of went under the radar as far as like, oh well, he's not stellar immediately. However, FC Nordsjælland knows that if we can put, and this is where, like I said, if you zoom out and you look at the what is the word? I just think of the word devastating, the devastating organization of resources. So they sign, actually, I'll take a step back. I use Simon Adingra as an example because his is a little bit more obvious because he's actually been sold. He's been transferred. Simon comes up through Right to Dream. They fly him up. He earns his opportunity to play for, they have under 17, under 19, but he started, I believe, under 19 at FC Nordsjælland. They put him under Hoffer, who is, I think he was the under 19 coach at the time. And then they have Fleming Peterson. And they teach him. So one of the key things about Fleming Peterson and FC Nordsjælland's strategy as far as developing players, they're not developing players to play Juego de Posición or Gegenpressing. Or I'm not saying any of those are good or bad. I'm saying more so that they are strategically and data, empirical evidence, looking at what works at Champions League level. What works at that level? Like what style of play, what decisions work at that level for each position. So they take Simon Adingra and they mold him into FC Nordsjælland's way of playing. If you look at the video for Simon Adingra last season, I don't believe that and I'm biased because I like him, okay? But I don't believe that there was a match where the right back or whoever was assigned to him in that right midfield contained him for the full 90 minutes or however long he played. And this is as a 19 turning 20-year-old. And you're dealing with a league that is underrated in its physicality and its athleticism on the wings, okay? So FC Nordsjælland, the Michael Hemmerson was the sporting director at that time. You look at one of the things I do with FC Nordsjælland, every time that they say Simon Adingra is being promoted to the first team, I look at what the sporting directors and all the coaches said, the managers said. Not because I care necessarily about what they're saying, but I'm looking at what reasons that they're giving for promoting that profile. Because you start to see the culture behind the identity. And what you see at FC Nordsjælland, you see a defined playing style of quick attacking, attractive football, but then you also see this system that rewards players that buy into what the manager is saying. So you have a club and you have a sporting director who has this pipeline of talent that consistently produces players that are learning how to play at a higher level, who are, and I hate saying this, but let's just for the sake of illustration, we'll be extreme about it. These players are as close to free as possible, right? Because they're academy players, they're developed players. They're as close to free as you're going to get in the world football setup. And they know that talent, yes, let's just some random Greek club like Panathinaikos is bidding 1.5 million euros for the player when he's 17. You're going to turn down that bid knowing that you have a player who's worth 5, 6, 7, 8 million euro. That's what arbitrage is. I mean, I know I took the scenic route to get there. Arbitrage is knowing that you have a talent of a certain caliber and not selling that player too soon. It's not that you're not going to realize a return, but more so understanding that there is a sporting benefit for being patient. So when I do Twitter, I do Twitter Spaces every Tuesday morning here in the States. It's noon London time, and what I've done the past 3 Tuesdays is I've done recruitment. I've done like a recruitment diagnostic on the Europa League clubs. The last group we did was, I believe, Group C, and I forget who's in that group, but Ludogorets is in that group from Bulgaria. And when you look at transfer market, is a beautiful, beautiful tool, because when you look at transfer market, you look at ins and outs, right? And for the most part, Ludogorets transfers aren't great. Or so let me rephrase that. They're not high ticket ones. There's not like a $15 million one and $20 million. You see 1.2, 1.7, 3.8, 1.2, 1.7. But then if you continue that thread of where that player goes, that player now, I know it's via transfer market. It's not, necessarily, you can't necessarily prove it, but that player is worth double what he was worth match value when he was at Ludogorets. And one of the points I made with on the Twitter space is that arbitrage isn't just about player trading. Arbitrage is not just about making a profit. It's also about understanding that, hey, we don't really have a great transfer budget, but we can overpay initially for talent. Pay a player more in wages so that we can meet our sporting competitive needs. Ludogorets and CSK Sofia are the, might be wrong, but from what I see, are the two best clubs in Bulgaria. Ludogorets needs to win the league every single year. Financially, they need to. They need access to Champions League. They need access to the Europa League, or it destroys their recruitment model, their club financial viability. So when you know that you can get the best left winger from the Israeli league for only, let's say, 2 million euros, but then know also that you're going to sell him down the line a season or two after you've secured European places, does it really matter if you make a profit or not as much? Not really, because you know that you're continuing the model of making sure that we either win the league and get to Europe, or we finished second in the league, but we still qualify for at least the European playoffs, Europa League playoffs. So I know that I crammed a lot in there, but arbitrage and player trading, well, to me, arbitrage is different and more strategic than player trading. Player trading is really, you're focusing solely on profit, which is fine. That's not good or bad. But arbitrage is saying, hey, how can we be strategically patient or strategically aggressive to pay for talent before other clubs outbid us?
It's very intriguing because you're starting to see elements of this creep into the Premier League, as you have to say teams in the bottom half try and seek a competitive advantage. Lee Dykes, co-director of football this summer at Brentford, spoke about it's now a race for these clubs to find the talent quicker than the big clubs can. And you've seen that in their acquisition of players such as Keane Lewis Potter and even Aaron Hickey. Further afield, what Southampton have done has been absolutely fascinating. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, David. They've hired Joe
Oh yeah.
Shields as their head of recruitment, previously head of academy recruitment at Manchester City. The acquisitions have been fantastic. Bella Ketchup, who's played less than 100 league games before his transfer, already called into the Germany squad. Romeo Lavia and also Sekou Mara, who've played combined less than 50 league games of football together, both 18 years of age. So it's really intriguing to see how elements of this may creep into the Premier League, where in the past, like the you'd have to say the average educated football fan, we'd be here speaking about Premier League clubs being lazy with recruitment, being that they can, in fact, afford the opportunity cost. Do you see more clubs adopting what Southampton are currently doing at the moment?
Yes, without a doubt. Now, what's going to separate the imposters from the true believers, if you will, is conviction. So no matter how well or how terrible Southampton does, that's what they do. They've been doing it since Les Reed. I mean, they've been doing it for decades, right? Now, in this environment, and I'm saying this, and I feel it makes me feel old to say this, but also um, it makes me feel privileged to have this point of view. Yeah, I used to. So I when I first started rewatching football again more seriously, I watched almost exclusively because that's what we had was Serie A, Italy. Italian football is not for the faint of heart. They, you want to talk about pragmatism and just unvarnished candor. Sporting directors do not talk like if they're not Juventus, Roma, Lazio, Napoli, AC or Inter Milan, or what's the other one? Fiorentina, the Seven Sisters. If you're not one of those clubs, you're talking about avoiding relegation. From the first weekend, from the first match day, you're talking about we just don't want to avoid. We want to avoid, relegation. So you're going to spend 37 weeks talking about avoiding relegation, right? But they also know that if they get relegated, that stream of income can make the club disappear in 6 weeks tops, right? Just as far as not being able to have the licenses to be a football club. So when you talk about Southampton, or even you start to see smacks of it with Newcastle and how they're recruiting, Wolves has said, Wolverhampton has said as much. It becomes a race to get talent sooner, which is good. Which is good as far as being proactive and getting talent at a look. And I'm gonna say this, and I'm just, I know how it sounds, but it needs to be said. So there's two parts of what I'm about to say. Football is a lot like business. People hate saying that. They hate hearing that. They want football to be a childhood romantic um, recreational activity. World football, as we see it, is not that. I'm not saying it doesn't elicit great memories and it is not entertaining. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that if you are running a club that is producing and spending multi-million dollar euros or dollars or whatever currency that you want, you have to run it at a level that is coherent. That's the first part. The second part, which is harder for some people to understand or swallow, is that if you want your club to be good, you need to get players at a lower rate than what they are worth. There's only 3 or 4. So, and the number might be small. I think there's 3 clubs. There's 3 clubs that can pay whatever the amount is for a player: Manchester City, Real Madrid, and PSG. Insert your negative comments about where football is going however you want. Okay, you be my guest. But that being said, the other few hundred clubs in European football, it is in your best mid to long-term interest to pay less for talent than to pay more for talent to get onto your team. It's just simple math. It's simple math. However, what tends to happen is whatever is popular, whether it's data or getting players from a certain region, a lot of people are going to replicate it and copy it. Which again, I don't see that as being negative or positive. It's just how things work. We copy what works, right? It's modeling. However, the clubs that stick to their identity, and that's what's key. What is your identity? Southampton, they do it a certain way. They've been doing it from Walcott and Gareth Bale to I can't even think of who this. Some of the guys that you mentioned this window, they're gonna keep doing it, and they're gonna. One of my favorite sayings is from an NBA basketball coach. I forget. I think he's with the Indiana Pacers now, and he essentially said, "Hey, we're going to do what we do, and we're going to do it hard. We're just going to do it in repetition ad infinitum because it's what we do." I don't know if Wolves or Newcastle or any of those clubs. I mean, even if you go down to championship level, I don't know if those clubs are going to stick to it. You know why? Because I don't think it's in their identity. I think it's good for the sport overall to move in that direction. But one of the hardest, well, it's not really hard, one of the clearest delineating opportunities for a club is they have enough money to sign, as they say in Italy, Mr. X, player X. Do you sign that player just because you have the ability to, or do you sign players only because they fit your playing style and your club identity? Most clubs don't do the latter, they do the former. And that is when or why you put yourself in a position. And, I'll use Everton as an example. I mean, I'm not Mr. Premier League. I'm not Everton or Liverpool based, but I was kind of surprised that they signed Rafa Benitez to be their manager, if only because of it was going against what they said they were trying to do. And oh, by the way, he managed Liverpool. That part was the white elephant in the room. However, again, if you have the money and you have the opportunity, if you don't have an identity, you don't always make the best decision. So I think it's good, but then I also don't know if I mean I would be shocked if 10% of those clubs who are moving in that direction keep or stick to it.
Yeah. And ultimately, I mean, it's going to be one of the key facets on which a sporting director's tenure will be evaluated, David. Um, I mean, one heuristic I always come back to is that on success, and it's something which Fabio Paratici, the current Tottenham sporting director, mentioned during his time at Juventus, being the best sporting director isn't the one that makes zero mistakes. It's the one that makes the fewest. Now, how can we exactly and fairly evaluate a sporting director's tenure?
This is a great question. This is a great question simply because you can't. You really can't unless you want to give them 5 years and judge everything. When I say everything, I mean, are we paying our vendors on time? Are we paying? Are we not paying? How are our operations and facilities? What have we improved? Like when we see sporting, I don't know, it's different from club to club, from country to country, league to league, but sporting directors touch every facet of a club. So yes, they will ultimately be judged on their recruitment. However, like to me, I try not to even look at a sporting director until they sat in the chair for 2 to 3 seasons. And when I say sat in the chair, if I want to make a thread or evaluate them and they've only been there 2 or 3 years, I am very careful to not talk about anything other than the project. Because it's not it to me, it is almost it's hypocritical, is very hypocritical to try to evaluate somebody on the big picture when we're only focusing on a snapshot, right? So if you look at, and this is probably a very terrible, terrible example. Imagine a sporting director's career or timeline in a club as the picture, I think is Michelangelo, The Last Supper, right? If we, bear with me. So if we look at the far right, wherever Jesus is in the picture, as it being like, at least 4 to 5 seasons in, if we just look at one window and we want to grade transfer, just as far as, even if you try to do it fairly and just look at need, roster need, squad need versus what was brought in, to me, it's heresy. Like you're essentially saying, hey, Michelangelo, great job painting that picture. I only want Judas. Like I don't want the other 12 people in the picture. I just want this window, or I just want this season where we won the cup. To me, how you begin, because it really is, it's almost I'm not into accounting. That's for the brave souls. But it's almost like wanting to audit a company for 10 years. I mean, I don't know what it's wanting to audit a company a government department over 10 years, because there are so many different facets of why decisions were made and when decisions were made and what funds were available and what I don't want to call it opposition, but what was what was the climate that that decision was made in, that we're essentially making judgments. We're we're judging a role or a person with complete information when that person had incomplete information at the time. So to answer your question, how I would begin is, you know what? Let's try to break this down as diametrically as we can. What is the project? Like what is the stated goal of bringing in sporting director X? Is it to develop players, or is it to win games? Okay, or win matches. Sorry. Okay, so let's just say it is to win matches. Okay, so let's knock out the non-visible stuff first. How are facilities? How are our employees as far as physios, teachers, man? Like how have we done with that? Okay, people don't normally get to see behind that curtain, so we won't focus too much on that because those pretty straightforward to a degree. Recruitment wise, okay, who did we bring in to fill in the roles in the squad, and how did they perform? Because at the end of the day, when you're the sporting director, when you're the leader, you are culpable, you are accountable for how other people perform that you brought in. Fair, unfair, that's just how it is. So if you needed a striker, if you needed goals, and you brought in 4 strikers and none of them scored more than, or them combined scored 20 goals over 4 years, you failed, right? I mean, simply, you failed in that regard, most likely. So um that's how, hold on. Okay. You still hear me? We're still good?
Perfect.
Okay. So project, what's our goal? What did we actually do? And then this is the part nobody wants to give enough credence to. How long? How long did we give him versus how long did he get? I mean, I'm trying to think of a more obvious example.
Look,
Oh,
unbel- unbelievable
what's that?
case study. Unbelievable case study which you've done in the past week. Edu at Arsenal. How quickly have things turned for him in relation to the fan base, in relation to what's being said at the media.
Yeah, perfect set. I didn't even think, I didn't even think about it because I'm so close to it. I mean, I could. eh, It's not that I'm popular on Twitter. I don't know what that even means, but some of the DMs I get, I wonder like what I'm missing. I mean, I have DMs of people calling for Edu's head this winter transfer window. I mean, I can go. I mean, I won't do it because I don't need to. It doesn't do anything for me. But I could screenshot them, and now if that person said that exact same thing, they would be shouted down on Twitter. And at the end of the day, the number one metric, because it screens out a lot of noise, is how long have you been in the chair? You know, when I looked at Monchi, has he failed? Sure. Has he made a lot of mistakes? Absolutely. He's still there, right? He's still there. And no matter, I mean, I think before they went into, sorry, right after the transfer window closed, they had taken 1 point out of 9 possible. Okay. So for the sake of being fair, it was terrible. Like, I mean, that's terrible, right? But one of his lines in his press conference to close out the transfer window, and he said it in his way, which some people see it as arrogance. Other people say, "Oh, no, that's just how he is." I don't know him personally, but I've read enough interviews. I've watched him enough live on video to know and to see how he said it when he said it in Spanish. He basically said, "Look, like 1 point in 9 is unacceptable. We all know that. However, it will be worth it when it counts." And he said it in this nonchalant slash, um, you lot do this every other year type of like response that I laughed at because I,
Well, look, for me, the
I
lines between success and failure in football, and even more so, especially in a role which is so publicly scrutinized as the sporting director, they're so fine. For me, they're two sides of the same coin. I always liken this, David, to the invisible tug of war. Football is essentially an invisible tug of war between short-term wants and long-term needs. And it's
oh,
it's your
well said.
durability to balance both in the medium to long term.
Yeah, yeah. It's Rasmus Ankerson uses the analogy, and I have an iWatch, so it doesn't work. But he uses the analogy of the sporting director is the minute hand. Okay, the manager on a watch. So on a watch, old school analog watch, the second hand is the manager. I mean, every 3 or 4 days, he's getting judged on talent as far as what we have, what we're doing. Did we win or did we lose or did we draw? Okay. The owner is the hour hand. The owner is, hey, this is where I want to be. How are you spending or wasting my money? Rinse, repeat. Where are we going? The sporting director is the minute hand. He has to, I mean, he has to know long term what is going on, but he's also like every minute is built up of seconds, right? I mean, that sounds really dumb to say it out loud, but like he has to, like, there has to be there has to be tangible building blocks in what they're doing. He has to be able to see, okay, where is this headed? And those short term wants are, I mean, I don't want to say that they're devils. I just want to say that there has to be. I mean, I know I said at the beginning that the sporting director is the lieutenant, first lieutenant of the ownership. However, um, the the ownership and or the board is the most important part. I mean, that is the black box. And black box, I use that reference as far as for planes, for major aircraft. They have a black box that can read. I mean, they're basically indestructible, and it records conversation with the pilot, the flight crew, air traffic control, and they can find out, you know, if the plane lost power on one side. They can find all the information about what happened before the tragedy, before the accident. Why am I using that analogy? Ownership in football, ownership in sports, we don't know 99% of what happens, right? Like we never will. We never will. And I'm not saying that needs to change. What I'm saying is that you only see the benefit of legit, functional, and visionary ownership by what the sporting director is allowed to do. What are we doing in recruitment? How are our facilities? Are the players that go through our academy who don't make it to the first team, are they good people? Are they getting their degrees? Are they passing their exams? What are we doing in the community? You know, again, I mean, I joke about this, but I write about sporting directors, but I'm really writing about owners because the owner is using that sporting director as a foil, as a shield, and that's I mean, I knew we were going to talk about this again, but when we were recording, but that's why I believe, like, you know, at Chelsea, Todd Bowley, he cannot stay in that seat much longer forget about him, for the club's benefit. He needs to put somebody in that chair because he needs to be able to be the hour hand. He needs to be able to see where can we take this club in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. He does not need to be looking at right backs in Bundesliga 2 or in Liga. Like, if he wants to, that's fine, but that should not be his primary function, you know? So, at least in my opinion. So, yeah, short term wants versus long term needs. My favorite spin on that is the future whispers and the present screams. It screams, we need a left back, we need a left back, we need a left back, we need a left back. What's the future saying? We need a better goalkeeper coach. You know, we need better nutrition for our academy. Those are whispers, right? Those aren't going to be headlines.
I can imagine Todd Bowley's having a lot of fun at the moment watching videos of Usman Dembele on his new Chelsea environment. But I
He's a good
mean,
player.
I wouldn't mind to see him on Stamford Bridge someday, David. I tell you that thing. Um, you know what though, as we begin to bring this podcast to close, David, I mean, it's been very enlightening for myself to learn more about the role of sporting director, as I'm sure it has been to others, and the huge role which recruitment plays within that. However, I mean, this future role of a sporting director, do you see it evolving into something which is currently happening in FC Nordzealand, or do you see it altering a different way?
No, I mentioned it earlier, and you just brought it up again. I see if a club is becoming a lot like, brace yourself, business, big business. There's no way you can be the owner, founder, recruiter, HR, IT. You can't do it all. Let me rephrase that. You can't do it all well, right? So if I'm looking at a level of a club, we won't use Chelsea, but say, well, I mean, any Premier League team is pretty much in the same category. I would have So a top five league, I would not be surprised in the next season or less you start to see clubs who are intent, especially if you want to get talent before your rivals. You need more information. The number one job, in my opinion, of a sporting director, I don't know if we got to this or not. The number one job of a sporting director is to gather information. You have to be able to know, okay, there's a class of 2006s um, that is just, we need to get on top of whoever their agents are, whoever their families are. We need to get them in the fold and know who they are now. We need to start making those networks now. 2006s are what, 16, 15, 16, 17, roughly. If you're on a Premier League club level, for the most part, you're not even signing that player to when 2026, 2000, like when they're of the level physically and athletically and football wise of a level to be a first team caliber. But that's 4 or 5 years out. But you have to be thinking that far out. The only way that you can even be talking about 2006 and 2007s is if you have that information. Like, make no mistake about it. Like, there's no way that you can make consistently good recruitment decisions without information, whether that's data based or old school scout based or video based. In my opinion, you need and want it all. You want to have as much, the more information that you have on anything, in theory, the better decision that you can make. So, to answer your question directly, I mean, in some club, I mean, Ralph Ragnick has stated this. In Germany, they're already doing it. I mean, you have director of football, then you have your, let's just give a generic title as far as youth academy recruitment. Then you have your head of scouting, if you will, and then depending on the magnitude or the specificity, if that's the word, of what you're doing, you add in another person who is essentially the assistant or the, I don't know what title you want to use, but assistant sporting director. And he is, dare I say, the conduit. I can't really see it. You have your sporting director, then you have your assistant sporting director, and then you have the little tree with the youth, the scouting, and then data or player analysis or whatever. So you have essentially four people who take, who are not the sporting director or who are not solely in charge of recruitment, but they recruit upwards vertically and they push information to the sporting director. How in the world, and this is where, again, I'll just use Todd Bowley as an example. How in the world are you going to be looking at profit and loss statements for a multi-billion euro organization at 9 o'clock, and then at, whoops, operator error, and then at 10:15, you pull up Instat and Y Scout, and you're looking at left backs in the Bundesliga, in France, and in Italy. You should not be doing that. I mean, again, that's not to be critical if he is doing it. I'm just saying, like, that you need, especially of a club of that magnitude, when the higher up you go in the food chain, as far as football teams, top five leagues, the less margin for error you have. So I haven't found it yet. When I find it, I'm tweeting it. But there was a conversation. I forget which sporting director it was. It was Italian. It might have been Beppe Marotta. But he was talking to Florentino Perez, and Florentino, for what it's worth, uh, he's a mastermind. It's annoying. It's annoying. It's very, very annoying. But he's figured out what works at Real Madrid, and we're sitting on year like 27 of it. It's annoying. I mean, just it's simple, but they execute. And he said, "Hey, like, why didn't you want to sign? You could have signed. I think it was Pogba. It was like you could have signed Paul Pogba when he was 21, 22 for 15, 20 million euros. Why didn't you sign him?" And Florentino laughed, said, "No, no, no, no. I see what you're saying, my friend, but I'd rather pay 60 million with certainty." Like, think about that. Like, the higher up you go, you cannot miss. You cannot miss when you bring in Lukaku, when you bring in Jorginho, when you bring in Giroud, or whoever, you cannot miss. If you're playing in the Danish Superliga and you're Aalborg and you want to bring in Anosika Ementa, look up that name. He's like, 1 meter 98, and you want to see if he can score for you, by all means, try him out. But you cannot trot out uncertainty at Stamford Bridge. That's why those guys get paid. They get paid very, very well. They also get fired very, very quickly if those results do not follow.
And David, I mean, overall, it's been a pleasure to follow your pathway. You're still on this journey of procuring more knowledge and realizing there's more wisdom to be attained out there. But as someone who's gone out like yourself and who's pursued their interests, who's scratched that itch, who has developed a niche for themselves within the football industry, what advice would you have for those listening that would even be the slightest bit inspired to do something similar?
Yeah, great question. What I would say, and this is not, I'm saying this with no spin. I'm just saying it because I had I had my doubts, and then they were quickly foiled. They were quickly, shown as being false. If you want to do it, do you would be surprised who is on the other end of your tweets or your likes on Twitter. Um, it's very easy. I'm just going to use focus on Twitter just because that's I have LinkedIn. I need to do more on LinkedIn, but you can't be afraid. You can't be afraid to make contact or to make, I'm going to say, a statement or whatever. The first bit of advice that I was given is from Andrew Wilkinson. I forget he was with Herrenbane. I forget who he's with now. But this was on Instagram. Funny enough, it wasn't even on Twitter. I was like, hey, like I don't know what I want to do, but like I keep seeing these players across Europe, and I see the talent, and I see what club that they would fit in. This is well before sporting directors, right? I was like, I see the talent, I see what clubs that they would fit into, and I see the financial part of it. But like, man, like I don't want to be wrong, like I don't want to share it on Twitter or on Instagram and just be like, oh no, 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 no. I said that 6 months ago or what. I don't want to do that. And it was like, mate, you got to figure it out, mate. Like he goes, if you don't believe in yourself, why would a club believe in you? And I was like, oh wow. So, and it's the truth. If you don't believe in what you're saying, if you don't believe in what you found, if you don't believe in your work, why would anybody? I mean, I don't care if they're in their mom's basement, and they're no, let me not go. I don't want to be too funny, but like, I don't care if they are they don't have a job or they don't have anything legitimate about what they do, but they just troll on Twitter. If you don't believe in what you have found or what you see, nobody else will. Nobody else wants to because you're the only one who has anything to lose. So for me, I think the hardest, and it wasn't even that hard, but I thankfully had the previous experience with the 11 questions book and whatnot. I kept telling myself, like, man, this sporting director thing, nobody wants to hear. Like, this is just me. This is just my obsession, right? Like, sporting directors, general managers, recruitment. This is me. Even some of the guys who have came before me, who are bigger than I am, honestly, bigger than what I want to be. Whether it's Tim Keach or any of these guys, they don't post what I post, right? Like, I mean, they talk about it, but they don't post as much as I post about sporting directors and recruitment. And I just remember earlier this year, like, I don't know if I really want to do this. Like, I like as far as like post about this, because I don't. Who cares, right? Everybody wants to talk about the players. You know, they don't want to talk about Monchi. Like, you know, what? And I remember I sat on it for maybe a week and change, and I said, you know what? No, like, so my first post was Monchi, and I didn't even do it. I mean, I was lazy. All his Monchi's master class during COVID, the COVID lockdown, is all in Spanish with subtitles, and I just made a 13 tweet thread about it, and I just remember posting like, all right, well, if it works, great. If it doesn't, great. Came back like 2 or 3 hours later, and I'm like, what? Like, ding, 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 ding. Like, my phone is blowing up, and I just remember telling myself, like, okay, smart guy, you're not smart. You just need to focus on what makes you tick. If you focus on what makes you tick, there'll be people who want nothing to do with you, which is fine. I don't, I'm not forcing anybody to follow my stuff. Then there's also going to be people who have been waiting for you. And this is the key part of what I'm going to say. You have to believe in what you see and what you found, but also you are doing a disservice to those people who have been waiting for you to share what you see and you're not sharing it. You have to share it. If you don't share it, then all that good content, that good perspective, that almost, it could be altering, life altering, club altering, player altering perspective that you have that you didn't share, it dies with you and your doubts. So I don't want to be overly inspirational, but I just want to say, like, to me, there's nothing worse. My whole athletic career was based off of one haunting thought. I didn't want to have grandkids, and one of my grandsons, us watching a American football game, and saying, "Grandpa, Papa, those guys are fast. Did you ever play football?" No, I don't want like that. That haunted me. That haunted me. Like, no. I wanted, not that I wanted to be known for playing football. I want to be able to answer my grandson and said, yes, I had a lot of fun. And for him to say, really, you played football? You know, that might be ego driven, but it's more so to say, like, I don't want the regret of not doing something. And for those of us, those of you who want to get into anything, it could be recruitment, it could be coaching or managing. If you don't step into it, nobody's gonna do it for you. I'm not. I'm gonna do I'm gonna do what works and what makes me tick. I'm not going to wait for somebody to have a cattle call, say, hey, is anybody out there interested in sporting directors? I'm trying to start XYZ. I wish it worked that way, but it doesn't.
It's some fantastic advice to close, and even more, and brilliant and fantastic podcast. So many lessons to be learned, to be something which I will be certainly listening back to for a second and third time. For those of which that enjoyed listening to your content, Dave, where's best to find you on Twitter?
So that's at if I could say it, at undervalue, no E at the end of the value. So yeah, it's funny. I always think of what I should do next, and then I get tired, and then I look at what is working, and I'm like, okay, I still have another 10, 15 years of doing this because it comes easy to me. But that's where to find my best stuff. When I say easy, just as far as thinking of what to share next, putting it on a thread or sharing it is hard as far as details. But I mean, we didn't even talk about a lot of other aspects of sporting directors, and yeah, those are, yeah, that's for another time.
Maybe there's something in there for a round two. It's an open invite.
It's accepted in advance. So,
David, thanks so much for coming on.
Connor, I appreciate you having me on. Look forward to the next time.